Hey, what's going on, YouTube? Our topic today is the newest hero, the epic Cav Commander Mardok. In this video, we'll go over his talent tree, his skills, we'll show some potential builds for him, we'll discuss where you want to pair him, and of course, we'll talk about war pets and other ways to build him out. So sit back, relax, and let's talk about Mardok. Alright, now right off the bat, let me tell you there's two things I love about Mardok. First, he's an epic hero available from the gold chest. He's available to pretty much everyone, low spender, free to play, no problem. Not only can you acquire this guy, you should be able to develop him, maybe even awaken him without that much difficulty. Alright, Mardok is a big W for the free-to-play and low spenders, and frankly, this game needs some wins for free-to-play low spenders. I love it. Right now, I'm not saying that Mardok solves all the recent pay-to-win smorgasbord that's been going on, just that he's a step in the right direction. We need more Mardoks and less SVIP mega buffs in the future, please. What's the other thing I love about Mardok is its movement speed. Now, players are going to have different opinions about how important movement speed is, but I'm a huge advocate for high movement speed on your Cav marches. If you're looking for higher end speeds prior to Mardok, you really only have three options, right? The G1 Cav, they have Emrys. The G2 Cav have Ferondel. The G3 Cav really don't have anyone, and then the G4 Cav, they've got Nea. Mardok can really help you address those movement speed issues wherever you are on the free-to-play to Kraken spectrum, right? So let's talk about what Mardok does, starting with his skill. And Mardok's first skill, his rage skill, that's really our first big L with Mardok, because Mardok's a casino hero. When he executes his rage skill, he does one of three things. Either a 1000 single target damage factor, or he gives his target a 50% defense break for 5 seconds, or he does 600 diffuse damage up to 3 targets. Alright, as far as I can tell from my testing, these occur randomly at basically equivalent rates. Alright, now why is this the big L? The casino nature means you can't effectively plan around these. It makes it harder to come up with a build with a warpad and overall strategy, etc. than maximizes what this hero does. Let's go through these one at a time. Alright, a 1000 damage factor for a Cav March is okay. It's substantially lower than all the legendary Cav heroes, but, they're legendary. For an epic hero, 1000 damage factor, that's decent enough. That's about what you should expect. Alright, nothing particularly interesting with that one. The second one, Timidity, 50% defense break for 5 seconds. That's pretty strong, honestly. If this hit reliably, you could do some interesting things here. For example, you could use Mardok in a Cav Ball and have him be the primary. He hits, he does his defense break, soften up the target is, and then all the other Cav heroes proc their big damage factors doing more damage to the compromised target, right? That'd be strong. But unfortunately, we don't live in that world, and do you want to build around a 1/3 chance to proc? I don't think so, right? This is nice when it procs, but like I said, it's pretty unreliable. Our third option, Fall Apart, deals diffuse damage to the target legion and 2 surrounding legions at a damage factor of 600. Remember, diffuse, that's a 15% damage reduction for each additional target. So if you hit 3 targets, they all get hit at that 30% discount. Now, I love AoE, but 600 at a 30% discount, you might as well be in a pillow fight at that point. That does virtually no damage. I think that's worth comparing this result to the other epic Cav hero, Alistar, because they're very similar. Right now, if you look at Alistar's rage skill, it does 600 damage factor to 2 Nara legions, and it inflicts the Coward debuff, which is a minus 20% counterattack for 2 seconds. Alright, that's not the greatest debuff in the world, and 600 damage factor is still low, but it's worth noting here that this is 600 damage factor, not 600 diffuse damage factor. So if you hit 3 targets with Alistar, they're all taking that 600 damage factor without any 30% reduction. And the debuff, it's not amazing, but it is a debuff. It can trigger some synergies, and it's better than nothing. Look, Alistar is not a great hero, but his third skill, which is the one comparable to Mardok's third skill, it's just strictly better than that. A good idea of where Mardok is on the power skill range. Alright, so let's talk about Mardok's other skills. His second skill, Renegade Zeal. This gives him 100 rage and a hit point buff whenever he gets a buff in the field. This would be awesome, except for this last line here. It can only trigger once per every 8 seconds. So you figure more or less every rage cycle you can get this off once. It's nice. We'll talk about some of the implications in this later on. But the limitation once every 8 seconds, you can't really build around this. The third skill, I love this. It's nothing particularly interesting, but the 10% march speed is very important for Cav legions. In particular, that means you can put Mardok in the deputy slot, and he is going to give you some march speed boosts. So even as a deputy, he can help solve your march speed problems. I love seeing it here. The fourth skill, Nothing particularly interesting here. 10% more skill damage, but he doesn't really do that much skill damage to begin with. Maybe your other commander does a lot of skill damage, so that'd be nice. And then 5% overall less damage. Okay, that's great, but nothing interesting. And then finally, his Awaken skill gives Mardok the Keen buff, which is a 15% attack for 5 seconds whenever he casts a rage skill. Honestly, this is very mediocre for an Awaken skill, but it does mean that if you have him awakened, and he's an epic hero, so it shouldn't be too tough to awaken him, he's going to maximize the second skill all by himself, regardless of how you have him built. So at least that awaken skill is useful so he self-fuels his second skill. All right. Now what about his talent trees? Well, Mardok's got the Cav, PvP, and mobility trees, and these are 3 trees I love on Cav heroes. The great thing is about these trees is they all have a ton of very easily accessible movement speed, and you can see how I have them built out right now. I have them built for the absolute movement speed here. You can get up to 68 movement speed through his talent trees alone, not even counting his skill movement. So you can get 78 speed with just him, right? That's extremely useful, and that's, I think, one of the strongest things about this hero. When I look at Mardok, I see a hero that's really not going to be a linchpin build-around type of hero. Instead, I see a hero that's really flexible, that can help you build out whatever your current Cav plan is. If you're a free-to-play or low spender, Mardok can help you get that second or third Cav march into the field when your alliance needs it, so that's good for you. And then again, if you're like one of the Kraken players, Mardok can help you build out that 5-march Cav ball, giving you that movement speed to help normalize things out. All right, so how do you build out Mardok? Well, there's no really fixed answer here. It's really going to depend on how you slot him into your overall build, your overall Cav ball, if you will. The case for using Mardok as a primary hero is really going to be his movement speed. So the builds I'm going to show you will mostly be based about movement speed to try and get an equalized movement speed around your Cav marches. Okay, so the rest of the package, and we'll start with artifacts quickly, since there's nothing really that complicated with the artifacts. Any of your generic Cav artifacts are going to be just fine with Mardok. For example, your Kingslayer, your Sorlin's Blade. The G2 Cav artifacts, and that's Spring Blades, that's Oath of Stormpeak, that's the Wolfhowl Horn, and that's Lunaris. They're all going to be fine, but their specific procs will not generally trigger with Mardok, so I don't really recommend them. Of course, it matters who you pair Mardok with. For example, Lunaris doesn't work at all with Mardok, but if you got him paired with Nea, then Lunaris will work fine, all right? Now, there is one additional artifact we should examine a bit more closely, and that's the Wolfhowl Horn. The additional effect here puts a bleed on the damaged target, and it can trigger once every 90 seconds. And it's really ideal for Urag because he does AoE every time, and it also works okay with Alistar. But what about Mardok? He does AoE, right? Well, we're back in Casino Land there. Yeah, sure, it works 1/3 of the time, and it works every time. I do not recommend the Wolfhowl Horn for Mardok for that reason. Okay, so let's turn to our war pets, where things get a lot more interesting. Now, if there's one thing that I've tried to stress in this video, that Mardok is a supporting Cav hero. There's no single hero he has to be paired with. And the meta is really, I think, is going to see a lot of combinations with him in it. So obviously, whatever hero you pair him with is going to have a lot of influence on what pet you use. But let's just take a look at the pets and what he supports to guide our thinking and our hero selection when it comes to him. And let's start out with the Cav pets. Our G1 Cav pet, that's the Golden Rock. Does that work? No. So the Golden Rock needs you to do the Passion buff. Mardok doesn't do Passion. When you don't have Passion, all the Golden Rock does is give you a very weak version of the Passion buff. That, it's not literally nothing, but it's pretty weak. The Golden Rock's a no. What about the G2 Cav hero? That's the Berserk Phaedrake. Now, the Berserk really wants you to inflict debuffs on the enemy, and it gives you a bonus for inflicting the Cowardice debuff. Mardok can inflict a defense break 1/3 of his rage cycles, and if you go all the way to the end of his talent trees, he can get some other very infrequent debuffs as well. So he can give you a very few there. Now, I think this is a marginal upgrade over the Golden Rock, because the Golden Rock's literally going to do no damage with its talent skill, whereas the Berserk is going to do a very little amount of its talent skill. So maybe slightly better, but still a solid no for the Berserk Phaedric. What about our G3 cav pet? That's the Blade Manticore. Now, the Blade Manticore is more on plan, right? It does damage to up to 3 legions and puts a debuff on legions damaged by your hero's rage skill. So 1/3 of the time, Mardok hits up to 3 legions. That's perfect, right? So 1/3 of the time, he hits 1 legion. Okay, that's okay. And 1/3 of the time, Mardok just does a defense break and doesn't do any skill damage. That wouldn't be great. But I still think this is pretty good. It's certainly our best option so far. Now, the one thing about the Blade Manticore, I've always been underwhelmed by the Blade Manticore. You know, I was told a little while ago that Blade Manticore got buffed. I didn't even notice the buff, and even with the buff, I'm still kind of underwhelmed with its results. Now, taking a look at my Manticore here, like, this isn't 100% cracked out here, but this is still pretty good. You'd think with built it out to this level, it'd at least get decent results, and I'm always underwhelmed with it. You know, all which is to say the Blade Manticore seems like it would work pretty well with Mardok. I just don't love it as a pet, so I rate this one as a solid maybe. Okay, so let's talk about the Auric Warhound. Now, the Auric buff mechanic triggers when your Legion gains straight rage. It's really designed for Nea. The buff maxes out at 5 stacks, and Nea gives you 5 stacks all by herself. Mardok does give you straight rage, but he's basically going to give you 1 stack of rage per rage cycle, so it's not nearly as good as Nea, right? But here's the thing about the Auric. The pet damage doesn't completely rely on the buff mechanic. Whereas the Golden Rock will literally never trigger if you don't independently trigger the Passion buff. And the Berserk Phaedric is going to hit like a stiff breeze if you don't have a lot of debuffs to back it up. The Auric still packs a pretty decent punch even without juicing its buff mechanics. For example, a 2-star Berserk Phaedric has a damage factor in the mid-40s without any additional buffs. A 2-star Blade Manticore will be around the 130 to 140 damage factor. But a 2-star Auric, it's pushing above 190. And Mardok is going to give you a little buff to that as well. Now, it's 2 targets, not 3 versus the Blade Manticore, but much like the Blade Manticore, it works pretty well. I'm going to rate it a solid maybe. Okay, any other options? Well, the Moonbear got a lot of love, particularly with the G3 cap. Remember, the Moonbear gets a bonus to its damage factor based on your commander and your deputy's rage skill damage factors. And a bonus on top of that with infantry, but it still works pretty well with, in particular, the G3 Cav, because they have such high damage factors, right? So that raises an interesting question. How does the Moonbear interact with Mardok's rage skill? Because it's a casino hero, and he doesn't do a consistent damage factor, right? Does the Moonbear take the highest number here, 1,000? Does it take a combination of all 3, like average 3 out? Does it combine all 3 to give you a 1,600 damage factor? You know, inquiring minds want to know, right? Does the Moonbear play dice? The answer is a big fat 0. The Moonbear considers Mardok to have a rage skill damage factor of 0 for the purposes of its skill. So the Moonbear, that's a hard no for Mardok. Okay, any other last options? Well, your generic pets, that's the Sand Lizard and the Venom Lizard. They're fine, I guess. Nothing special here. The Sand Lizard, it works for everyone, but it tends to work better for ranged marches. And the Venom Lizard, well, that works on anything getting focus fired, but you generally don't want to put it on Cav because once Cav get focus fired, they don't last all that long, right? If you're building a pet out specifically for Mardok, I think the Blade Manticore is a good choice, and I think the Auric Warhound is a slightly better choice. And that's my review of Mardok, our newest hero. I think he's a good addition to the stable. I think he's especially good for his flexibility, and I love the fact that free-to-play or low spenders can get this guy, max him out without too much difficulty. I intend to incorporate him into my marches, and, you know, I'm looking forward to playing with him next season. Hey, that's it. Now I feature a number of War Pet themed series on this channel, and I'm always looking for more War Pets to feature. Now this could be a pet you're struggling with, and you'd like in-depth advice on how to build it out, or it could be a super strong pet, and you'd like to see it featured in the Doom Pet series. I try to help anyone who needs it with any War Pet related issues. So if you do send something in, please let me know whether you're interested in being featured in one of my videos, or if you're just looking for some quick advice. I'm happy to help either way. I also try to address more general, pet-related questions the community might have. If you have any of those, please let me know in the comments below. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed this content or found it helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. And until next time, stay classy, Belleron.